Lo, the Poor Indian, Romance of the Osages and Oil by Elmo Scott Watson. Pinedale, Wyoming Roundup, April 22, 1926. When Alexander Pope, some 200 years ago, wrote the lines, "Lo, the poor Indian, whose untutored mind sees God in clouds, or hears him in the wind," he little realized that he was giving to the English language an expression which was to become a classic characterization of a whole race of men. For American sentimentality has made poor, lo, and Indian synonymous terms, seemingly unconscious of the ironical fact that it has been the American people, the white usurpers of the land occupied by the original Americans, who are principally responsible for the poorer half of the expression. So poor, lo became a part of our currency of speech until the modern history of the Osage Indians seemingly proved the falsity of this as of many of our other rubber stamp expressions. But recent developments down in the Osage country in Oklahoma, where oil wells have been pouring a golden stream of material wealth into the laps of these Indians, now suggest that perhaps the poor, lo designation is not so inappropriate after all. For the Osages, millions have brought death to some of them and sorrow to the others in the realization that they have yet much to learn of the bitter lesson of the white man's greed. The Osage murders, which have occupied so much space in the newspapers lately, aptly been called, quote, one of the blackest chapters in the history of the white man's dealings with the American Indian, unquote. They are the result of what appears to be the effort of a well-organized band of men to destroy with bullet, poison, and bomb the heirs to some of the Osage's rich oil lands. This effort already has resulted in nearly a score of murders, and government officials who are investigating the case predict even more sensational disclosures as their case against the men already indicted for the crime develops. In this centering the attention of the nation upon this tribe of Indians, whose sudden rise to wealth within the last decade has kept them constantly in the limelight, these murders serve to recall some of the early history of the Osages which, in contrast to their later peaceful record, was one of much war and bloodshed. The name Osage is a corruption by the French of Osages, their name for themselves. The Osages or Osages were the most important southern Siouan tribe of the Western Division, and their original home was along the Ohio River. But in the constant shifting of Indian population on account of tribal wars and the nomadic traits of the red men, they eventually crossed the Mississippi probably around 1500 AD. The first mention of the Osages in written history is in Father Marquette's map of 1673, which shows them located along the Osage River in Kansas and Missouri. In 1701, Iberville, another French explorer, found them living near the Arkansas River, and he numbers them at 12 to 1500. In 1714, they were helping the French defeat the Fox Indians at Detroit, and 3 years later the tribe received its first official visit from the French. Dutin, a French officer, visited a part of the tribe which was then living along the Osage River, and records the fact that this village had 100 cabins and 200 warriors. All of the early French travelers comment upon the warlike qualities of the Osages, who were the inveterate enemies of the great Illini Confederacy, and who were held in terror by the Cadone tribes of the Southwest. Although they were constantly at war with the Illinois, at one time the warring tribes patched up a sort of truce, and when the Iroquois descended upon the Illinois from the east, the latter sought refuge for a time among their newfound friends, the Osages, across the Great River. The first Americans to come into contact with these people were Lewis and Clark. By this time, the tribe seems to have been divided into two main groups, the Great Osage and the Little Osage. The American explorers state that in 1802, the Great Osage, under the leadership of a chief named Big Track, had migrated to the Arkansas River, and in 1804 they found this subdivision, numbering 500 warriors, in a village on the Osage River. The Little Osage, then only half as numerous as the Great Osage, were occupying a village 6 miles distant, but a group known only as the Arkansas Band, 600 warriors strong, was located on the Vermilion River, a branch of the Arkansas. On November 10, 1808, the first treaty between the American government and the Osages was signed at Fort Clark, near Kansas City, Missouri. In it, the Indians ceded all of their lands except those comprising the present state of Oklahoma north of the Canadian and Arkansas rivers. But this treaty was only the beginning. Later sessions at St. Louis on June 2, 1825, at Fort Gibson, January 11, 1839, and at Canville, Kansas, September 29, 1865, gradually cut down their holdings until of all the vast territory which the Osages once claimed, and to which they had held a precarious title by force of arms, but little remained. Although the relations of the Osages with the Americans from the beginning were more peaceful than those of many Western tribes, these warlike people did not give up their lands complacently. Evidently, they were troublesome enough a century ago, For one of the provisions of the treaty made in 1825 was that the Osages were to refrain from interfering with the trade from the Southwest, which was just then beginning, and which was destined to make the historic Santa Fe Trail, which ran through the Osage country, a great trade artery. One of the finest of the canvases painted by the celebrated artist, John McStanley, is an Osage scalp dance. The artist, who visited the Osages in the early 1840s, says of this painting, "On returning from the scene of strife, they celebrate their victories by a scalp dance." This picture represents the scalp dance of the Osages around a woman and her child, and a warrior is in the act of striking her with his club, his chief springing forward and arresting the blow with his spear. However, the United States never engaged in a general war with the Osages, and it is noteworthy that they were more often our allies in wars with other tribes than our enemies. It was a band of the Osage Scouts who guided General Custer to Black Kettle's camp of Cheyennes in Oklahoma in the winter of 1868 and took part in a much-discussed battle of the Washita which greatly weakened the power of the hostiles.